tear, it falls and hits the ground. A tree, it falls without a sound. A bird, it calls and sends you home. A man, he sits in the cold all alone.
Thank you so much, Suzy, for being here. It's great to have you. Please tell everyone a bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. It's just wonderful for being here. And I'm so happy that you're doing this for women, because this kind of a resource wasn't available when I was looking to have babies. So I'm well past that stage at the moment. But my story started about 20 years ago, and I was trying for a baby, and I ended up having a miscarriage very, very early on. It was about 6 weeks. And it was a horrible, horrible experience. I'm sure many of the listeners have experienced that. And it was just one of the most awful experiences, especially, for what was going on in my body, but also so many people who I knew and my friends were all getting pregnant. And so I had, yay, congratulations, you're pregnant. And here I am suffering. And so that was the emotional side, was really tough. So, but I also want to inspire some of the listeners to understand that there can be a way forward. And just through my story, which we'll get into in a little bit, I discovered that I had a particular condition. And if it's treated, I can go on to have healthy pregnancies, which I did. And I now have two boys who are 16 and 19.
That's awesome.
So,
yeah, not all women get diagnosed with something. Sometimes it's unexplained, but we all know that means there's something. We just
just hasn't been found.
Yeah, we haven't found it, we haven't named it. We can't come up with a name for it yet. It must have been a relief when you found out. So let's dive into sort of the beginning of your sort of fertility journey.
So even before that, I actually had we had some fertility issues because my cycles were totally out of whack. I would get my period like once every 2.5 months or so. So it didn't give me too many opportunities to actually get pregnant. And so we did see a fertility doctor, and I had one dose of Clomid, and that ended up working out. This is now for the second pregnancy, now my 19-year-old. So I feel like I've been through a lot, and probably some people can relate to that. But what happened with me with the pregnancy loss, because I didn't know I had any issues other than having, a strange cycle, probably like 4 months or so before I became pregnant, I had this strange rash that just went all over my body. It was really strange. I thought it was actually Lyme's disease because I had these like rings, these sort of red rings. It wasn't itchy. It wasn't raised. It was just the strangest thing. So of course I go to my general practitioner, and she says, oh, well, I don't really know what this is. Go to a dermatologist. So I went to the dermatologist, and they did all sorts of tests and took samples and whatever. And they said, we don't really know what this is. Why don't you go to an allergist? Okay. Went to an allergist. Did all sorts of tests. Don't really know what this is. Then I think that doctor said, why don't you go to a rheumatologist? I was like, I don't even know what that means. I never even heard of that word or that profession. Okay. So I made an appointment with a rheumatologist. So this all took, you can imagine, months. It really was about 4 months. Well, lo and behold, I had the rash. Yes, it still was there a little bit. It was sort of fading. But so I made this appointment for this rheumatologist. Apparently he was very well known. I'm in New York, by the way. And so it took about 6 weeks to get this appointment. And, here all along, we're just trying to get pregnant and, normal course of things. I become pregnant. And then I ended up having the miscarriage, really what turned out to be about 5 or 6 weeks later. Lo and behold, the day that I had the miscarriage was the day of this appointment with the rheumatologist. So I was, grieving of what just happened. Plus, it was actually quite painful, which I never really didn't know anybody who had a miscarriage. It really wasn't something that was talked about. So I was in a lot of pain, but I was like, I have to figure out what's going on with this stupid rash that I've been having and visiting all these doctors. I went to the rheumatologist in tears. He was the nicest man ever, the best bedside manner of any doctor I've ever seen since then. And I explained what happened. And he said, well, he was just so sorry with what I had been through. And he said, let me just run a few extra tests. He had no idea what the rash was, by the way. He ran some blood work. And it came back that I have this condition, which is a genetic condition, and it's called factor V Leiden. And it's spelled with the letter V, like the Roman numeral V, and then Leiden is Leiden, and it's named after a city in, I think, in Denmark, where it was discovered. So I had this thing called factor V Leiden. I'm like, what is that? So it's a blood clotting condition, and often people who have it have trouble holding a pregnancy. And so in a way, I was very lucky that I found out then. I only had one miscarriage, and then I was diagnosed. And so that honestly was really a blessing, because it's a genetic thing. So of course we trace it back in the family, and you can either inherit one gene from your parents, or you can inherit two genes. So it, goes to your, genetics biology classes. So it turns out that my father actually has both genes, and that's what's called homozygous for factor V Leiden. My mother had none. So I inherited none from her and one from him. So I'm what's called heterozygous. So I just have one gene. So if you have one gene, you're less likely to have a blood clot or have an issue. If you have two genes, you're actually, much more at risk of developing a blood clot. So for me, being heterozygous, I discovered that I have this thing. And when I do get pregnant, I needed to take a blood thinning medication, and that would help me retain the pregnancy. And so I did. So I got a high risk OBGYN. I had a hematologist on my team, and I ended up getting pregnant after having that one dose of Clomid, and have a healthy 19-year-old boy. And then I later had my second child. And again, I was on the blood thinning medication. And there's a few different medications out there. There are names like heparin, which has been around for like 75 years or so, Lovenox, Fragmin. There's a new one out called Xarelto, which is actually a pill. The other three actually all injections. Oh, wow. So with my first pregnancy, I had to take 2 injections a day for the entire time that I was pregnant, in your stomach or in your rear end, like in your kind of
like I've seen
area.
Yeah, a bit like the IVF stuff, like, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So I had to inject myself with this blood thinning medication, and twice a day. And the other ones are once a day, but they're, I don't know, there are reasons why doctors give different ones. And I'm not a medical professional, so I can't say why, but, and some you can take when you're pregnant and some you can't. And so then I thankfully had 2 healthy pregnancies. And other than that, like in regular life, unless somebody has had a blood clot or a pulmonary embolism, which is a blood clot that breaks off and goes to your lungs, quite dangerous. And blood clots are quite dangerous. But other than being pregnant or maybe having surgery or being immobile for a long time, like if you're on an airplane flight that's longer than 6 hours, or you're going to be in a very sedentary position for a long time, those are sort of warning signs when you should be taking, potentially, obviously with consultation with doctors and all of that, but you should be taking the blood thinning medication, because you're at a higher risk for developing a blood clot. So the information was critical in my story of later, luckily, having kids. And most women, they end up suffering a few miscarriages or stillbirths, and because it's not something that doctors would normally really test for. I just happened to show up at this doctor's office, with this rash, which still, this is now 20 years later, and there's it's never come back, and I have no idea what this rash came from. It was just this very crazy story that got me this, diagnosis. And I'm really thankful, because later on, it really saved, my father had a blood clot later on, and we knew right away. It was like, okay, factor V, like he knew, and he actually, because he has both genes, he has to take blood thinning medication, and he's had a blood clot. So he has to take it continually. Somebody like me, I haven't had any episode of blood clots. So it's not required, just if I'm in those higher risk situations. So yeah, so that's my story.
Oh my gosh. And it saved your dad too, because
yes,
you only found out about it through being pregnant. And
exactly.
Oh, wow.
So everybody was on guard, and my sister is the same condition as I have.
Started with the rash.
Yeah, totally unrelated. I mean, I don't know, things aligned, and then this crazy, doctor's appointment that just happened to be on the exact same day. And he was smart enough to think, oh, let me, because with he, I don't know if rheumatologists, I don't even know what rheumatologists do to this day, but
I use rheumatology. I'm like, huh?
yeah, I mean, I think there's like rheumatoid arthritis and things like that, but I honestly have no idea how it's related. It was, and why I even saw him, because I had this rash. I really don't know.
There's got to be
someone's
watching right now and cringing. Someone's watching.
Yes, of course. I apologize, and I'm not a medical person. But yes, no, there's actually a lot of autoimmune conditions, and I think that's what rheumatologists see, people with autoimmune conditions. And factor V Leiden does fall into that category. But what's crazy is that it is something that it is the most common blood clotting condition that's known. And I think the percentage is 1 in 20 European descended people have it. So that's quite high. So it's 5% of European descendant people. And my family is from Eastern Europe originally. So yeah, so it's something that, people might, want to ask their doctors, could you please do this test for factor V Leiden? There's probably other anticoagulant or coagulant tests that they can do as well, and autoimmune tests. So, it's just, I never heard of it before that, and would never have known that I had it. And, so in a way, it was all sort of a blessing, obviously a terrible loss, but a blessing because it's really saved people in my family. So, and we actually have just another crazy story, is that my father's secretary was having trouble conceiving, and she had had a few miscarriages, and he told me about this, and I said, why don't you ask her if she has factor V Leiden, or she should get tested. Guess what? She did. And she had 2 miscarriages, and then she ended up having twins after she had the right treatment. So yeah, it's, I just got chills.
that is so amazing. I'm a Christian, and for me, like that whole journey, I'm just like, oh, that makes me think.
For a reason.
I don't know if you're Christian, but yeah, just instantly I think of him. But gosh,
right.
That's amazing. I mean, look, none of us want to be part of this club and know what loss of a baby.
I'll happily give my membership back, but
yeah, but to have those sort of silver linings, I don't know what's the best way to say it, but having like, something good coming out of something so horrible, I think that is a real blessing, that it wasn't just all awful. Like, it saved your dad, it saved this woman from another loss. She had twins. That's amazing. And then you got to have kids as well. And it's so amazing. There's women, I think, who have what you have, and they still aren't able, even with medication. I think there's a few cases where I saw, like, I looked it up, like blood clotting. I didn't know that was the name for the V Leiden thing, but they said that they had a clotting issue. They were on meds.
And often they might have some other autoimmune conditions, and I actually do have another one as well that's just random, that I don't know where it's called anti-cardiolipin antibodies. Again, the same doctor found it. And it's I mean, it's just another puts me at a higher risk for developing a blood clot. And I think with that one, you tend to have pregnancy loss quite early on. So it could have been cardiolipin antibodies that caused me to have the miscarriage. It could have been the factor V Leiden, both of them. I think I was reading that with factor V Leiden, people tend to have later losses. Mine was so early on, because I think the autoimmune condition has something to do with like how the egg actually embeds, and the body just rejects it, because it's like, this is a foreign body, I don't know what this is, so dispel it. And then so you have a pregnancy loss quite early. Which was my condition. So I, we'll never know. Again, just discovering that, and often doctors just don't test, because they wait until, because unfortunately miscarriages are quite common, and the tests are quite expensive. So doctors don't always run them the first time a woman suffers a miscarriage.
Yeah, no, they usually nowadays they only run them every 3. So you have to have 3 losses, and then they're like, okay, now we should look into it. And you're like, I think 1 was enough, mate.
Yeah. No, and that's fun, because that's what the recommendation was when I was getting pregnant, which is 20 years ago. So it really hasn't changed.
No, it hasn't changed at all. Yeah, it's still 3. Mind you, if you really advocate for yourself and you really push and you go to the right doctor, I've heard some success stories where they've managed to get some testing. Like I got a couple of extra tests that I wouldn't have gotten had I not said, well, what can we do? Like I get you can't do much, but I've just had 2 losses. So, let's do something now. Like I want to test whatever.
Right. Well, and I think also knowing if your family history. So if there had been people in my family who had suffered blood clots, then that would have been something that I would have brought up to the doctors right away, because that's an indication that there is a clotting problem, a potential clotting problem in the family. So people might think, oh, grandma had a blood clot, and or a pulmonary embolism, but they might not think to mention it to their doctor when, they're trying to get pregnant. Like you don't just kind of blurt that out. And so, having a blood clot, anybody in your immediate family, is an indication that it could be a blood clotting condition. So again, it's having that information and then going to your doctor and saying, my grandmother or my sister had a blood clot, or my father or mother, can you please test me for clotting issues, especially if they've suffered a miscarriage. So, and also I wanted to point out that when women are on oral contraceptives or on hormone replacement therapies, that's already a condition where women are more likely to develop a blood clot. It's just because there's more estrogen in your body, and estrogen could potentially cause a blood clot. So for the average person who isn't on any birth control or hormone replacement therapies, let's say their risk is 0. But if you are on those, you have a 2 or 3 fold chance of developing a blood clot. If you have factor V Leiden and you're on oral contraceptives, your risk goes up to 35-fold.
Wow.
Right. If you're on hormone replacement, it goes up to 25-fold. So I know personally, which I found out later, I should never have been put on oral contraceptives that contain estrogen, because I have this clotting factor. So it could be quite dangerous. Thankfully, I did not develop a blood clot while I was on oral contraceptives. I'm now at the other end of the spectrum where I would potentially be, I just turned 50. I mean, I'm not planning, and I obviously know I cannot take hormone replacement therapy because it has estrogen or estrogen-like substances. So knowing this, that I have factor V Leiden, puts me, in a position where I know, I'm not going to be asking for that. And even an IUD, a lot of IUDs, it might be called something else in Australia.
I don't know.
A loop, is it called? When the contraception, it's like the insert in the uterus.
Oh yeah, I think they call it a coil.
A coil, that's it. A coil.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So some coils have estrogen that they release. And again, I'm not a candidate for that. And anybody who has a clotting condition wouldn't be a candidate because it has estrogen. So, there are some things that people need to be aware of, if they have these conditions. So, but I think as soon as you mention factor V Leiden to anybody who's working in a medical professional, they would understand that and know. So, yeah.
There's so many different conditions now because they found them, Yeah, and it's amazing what we can do. And that was 20 years ago. That's
yes,
right.
Apparently factor V Leiden was only discovered in 1994.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh, even more lucky.
Yes. And interesting enough, like when I go back and think about my own family, so it turns out my grandmother had 2 children, my father and his sister. And this was in like the late 1930s, 1940s. And there was an 8-year gap between them. And my grandmother unfortunately passed away, before I had kids, so I could never ask her, but she obviously had factor V Leiden as well. And I wonder if she had suffered some miscarriages because, back in like the 30s and 40s, to have an 8-year gap between your children,
it was a big deal.
That's unusual. That would be unusual. Yeah. So I wonder, my aunt didn't know, my father didn't know. So,
well, they used to keep things very like hushed up back then as well, because it was very much stiff upper lip, don't talk about your feelings, and
especially and then there isn't much talk about miscarriage now anyway. And this is like, how many years later?
Yeah, right? This event that I'm trying to organize, I'm trying to get about like 100 speakers, and that's apparently the biggest online event for
wow.
And I was thinking, like for infertility and pregnancy loss, like shouldn't this have already been done? Like, how is it like I'm trying to do this? And it's because there's so many women who suffer from this. And after you go through it, you like mention it to someone and they're just like, oh yeah, I had one this many years ago. Just like all these women in my circle, and I didn't know because no one says anything because it's so taboo and it's such a thing that isn't really discussed. You know.
And I really felt like I suffered alone because first I was, I don't know if embarrassed is the right word. I was like ashamed, I guess, that I had this loss. I felt like I couldn't really talk to people about it. If I did mention to a few friends, and you're right, like some people were like, oh, I did too. I had one as well. And then you're just shocked. But I remember not telling a lot of people. And I felt like, my body is broken. There's something wrong with me. And especially with the fertility problems and then having a loss also, I really felt like my body was broken. And that was hard. I'm sure some of your listeners can relate to that too, that you're just so frustrated that, why is everybody else getting pregnant? First of all, we should never compare ourselves to other people because you have no idea, what people are going through. So, I remember going to the very first time I went to that fertility clinic, I had to get my blood work tested. You have to go like every other day or something like that. And I walked into this room and it was doctor's office. There, I kid you not, there must have been about 70 women. It was like 7:30 in the morning because you're supposed to get your blood work done right, like first thing in the morning. There seriously must have been 70 women there, all waiting to get their blood worked. And I was just like, what? Like, there are so many people suffering from infertility here for treatment. And that was just like, every day I went to do the same, different 70 women. So I'm so glad you're doing this because I think the more people talk about it, the more they don't feel alone.
Yeah. And I mean, that was 20 years ago, 70 women. And there's even more now. Like the percentage is so much higher for, infertility and pregnancy loss. So thinking about that, it's just so, gosh.
Well, and there's also lifestyle choices. Women are waiting to become pregnant, to start families, and that has an effect on things. Obviously, the health of the woman. I knew before I started trying, I was about 15 pounds overweight. So I said, well, I'm going to have a baby. And, I don't want to start my weight loss, like already 15, like afterwards, trying to rebound, so I lost about 15 pounds before I got pregnant, so that took a little while it was about 7 months or so that took me to lose that weight. I did it very slowly and gradually. And then once I had the baby, then it was easier to get back to that normal weight. And I knew what it took to lose the weight. And, again, I did it very gradually, just really watching what I ate and, doing some moderate exercise. I wasn't going crazy, but just looking after yourself, taking those vitamins when you need to, right? All of that. So it's all part of the whole wellness thing and just getting your body in the best shape that it can be. And now actually my career is in nutrition and wellness, and I'm an integrative nutrition health coach. And I work with women on getting their lives under control. They're from a lifestyle point of view, from a nutrition point of view. I don't work with too many women in the fertility stage, but definitely on the other end, leading into, perimenopause and menopause, because there's a lot of hormonal changes that happen. Women often gain weight during that time. And it's a time of transition as well, because a lot of women at that stage are going through divorce or they're becoming empty nesters. So there's a lot going on in their lives, and looking at lifestyle factors that can lead to stress that can have a very big impact on how you consume food and have food cravings. And sometimes it affects your sleep as well. So I don't know if any of this from my past has sort of, gotten me into this particular career. It's somewhat of a relatively new career for me. But it's been really rewarding, and I just care a lot about women's health in general. So
yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Like, how has your experience sort of brought you into this space? And are you experiencing menopause, or have you experienced menopause? I know some women go for it in their 40s, some women go for it in their 50s. So how did that happen? And we actually have a couple of speakers who have gone like who are going through menopause at very early ages. And I'm sure there's women watching here who are going through menopause very early as well. So yeah, any knowledge that you can, pass on, sure would be great, appreciated. And obviously we'll link you down the bottom so they can learn more about you and your services and everything, and hopefully what they need if they are suffering.
Yes. Well, I can't really speak to people who go through early menopause. I don't have any real training in that. And that's, probably related to some kind of a medical condition that they have. But for the typical woman in their sort of 50s or so who's going through that, I personally, I'm probably am in perimenopause, which apparently can be like 10 years long.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think the definition is if you don't have a period for a year, then you're usually in perimenopause. So I guess I'm in perimenopause. And to be honest, touch wood, I really have not had any effects. I've had hot flashes or, night sweats or weight gain or anything like that. But I think, and I am attributing it to the way I live my life, because with my profession being in integrative nutrition, I'm doing everything I can to live a very healthy life so I don't have those things. And sometimes the foods we eat and the lifestyle factors that we have can contribute to those menopausal symptoms. I'm not saying it's the only thing, but often people who do have hot flashes, do suffer from hormonal changes, can make slight improvements by cleaning up their diet, deprocessing what they eat. The packaged food industry, at least in the United States, there are a lot of loopholes, and there's a lot of stuff that is sold as food. It looks like food, it smells like food, and it even tastes like food. It's actually not food, because you turn over the box, the front of the box is basically an advertisement. The back of the box, the nutrition labels and the ingredients, and it's a bunch of chemical, ingredients. And some of them we do know what it does to our body. Some of them we don't know. And there have been studies done. There are medical professionals and scientists who look into what these ingredients actually do to our bodies, and they can cause cravings. There's a gut-brain connection. So what you eat and the health of your microbiome definitely has a play on how you feel, and can lead to chronic conditions. I mean, even, like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
So, it's really important to know what you're eating. And basically the lesson is to eat real food. And if you can spell it and you can pronounce it, that's a pretty good sign that it's probably something you should be eating. If your grandmother or great grandmother wouldn't recognize the ingredient, then maybe you shouldn't be putting it in your body either. So
if you can't read it, it's probably not edible.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Yeah, I've been looking at packets for a long time now. I had my first son 7 years ago, and yeah, when I sort of got pregnant, I started really looking at packets, and it wasn't like a thing beforehand. I was just like, I can eat whatever, I'm young. But yeah, and then I got pregnant, and obviously, you get that wave of kind of responsibility, and I have this life to take care of. And yeah, I started looking at the back of the packets, and I was horrified. Like, some of the words, you're like, what is that?
Yeah.
Inverted something or other, and you're like, oh, okay.
Invert sugar, right. Well, and right. So, the food manufacturers, they have to list the ingredients in the order they appear in the product by weight. So the most prevalent ingredient is listed first. And do you know that there's more than, at least in the United States, there's more than 60 names for sugar? Do you know why?
No.
Because they don't want to have sugar as the number one ingredient. So they split it up. And they have cane sugar and brown sugar and molasses and honey and glucose and fructose, and right. And so they split it up, and you start looking and you see all those OS names are sugar.
Add them all together.
And yes, when you add it all together and you see what the added sugar is, you're like, oh, that's quite different than what you thought. And sugar is hiding in so many things, like salad dressing and spaghetti sauces, obviously, cereal bars and granola bars. I mean, the energy bars, they're hugely popular here. I don't know if they're there, but
yeah,
wow.
they are. Yeah.
even yogurt, things like, yogurts have all sorts of artificial sweeteners. They have the natural sweeteners as well. And there are other ingredients like natural flavors that are really it's just another name for chemicals, because it's a big loophole in the system that natural ingredients, there's actually the term that you see on the back of packets that says natural ingredients.
Yeah.
Natural flavors.
Yeah, natural flavors. I love that. I'm like, what's that?
What is that? Yeah, well, you know what it is? It's basically, you can have up to 100 chemicals in there and still be allowed to call it natural flavors. It's a huge loophole. And those flavorings are put in there to make that product so delicious, so delectable that you just want to go back for more. So, it's not enough to just put blueberries in the yogurt, right? It has to be blueberry natural flavor, because they want to have the product consistent. So if you buy it in, New York, it's the same thing as if you bought it in Sydney, right? So they have this, so they use the chemical ingredients to make the product the flavoring consistent. But that flavor is so delicious that you basically crave it and you want more of it. And so then you start overeating, and that gets into a whole spiral thing. And if you now look, most soft drinks have it, anywhere, any package almost, I'd say about 80% of the products out there have natural flavors, and obviously artificial flavors, which we know are not real, but they're all designed to either increase the shelf life or increase the intensity of the flavor so that we want that product more. So this is part of the program that I have, that I teach people what some of these ingredients do to us. And when you know the kind of, story behind it, it kind of makes you less wanting to have that particular food. And again, we go back to the eat real foods, eat something, you know what fish is, you know what tuna is, you know what an apple is, right? You can say it, you can pronounce it, you could hold it in your hand, right? But, titanium dioxide, you can't exactly hold in your hand. And that's actually a very scary ingredient. So.
Even though, even with like an apple, like even that can be dangerous now, because they've got like, what is it called? I think the Arctic white or something, and they've made it so you can cut it open and it doesn't brown. And I'm like, well, that's not normal. So how have you done that? What have you done? Like, what have you added? And, they call it gene editing and like modifying or whatever they want to call it. And it is crazy what they're doing with our food, and people are just eating that stuff up. And I will put it down below, but there's a picture from, I think it was the 70s, and it was a beach, and it's got all these people on the beach, and they are trim. They are like abs and like looking good. And this wasn't for an ad or anything. This is just a normal day at the beach, just a photo. And then it showed the same beach, but like I think it was a couple of years ago.
Right.
And oh my goodness, the size difference, the body look difference, the shape difference. People like in this new picture, people are way bigger. Some people are morbidly obese compared to, and then you have people who are sort of skinnier, but not to the same degree. Like there's like health and fitness going on in the 70s picture. But then you look at this picture and it's like, gosh, like something's gone wrong. And obviously you have a look at what was going on at the time, and then you see like all the packaged foods, like you said, like crisps and chocolate and all these things.
There's also lifestyle changes too. We lead a much more sedentary lifestyle right now, with us always being on mobile devices and computers and so we're just not getting out there. And there's a fascinating study. Dan Buettner had done the blue zones. It's so interesting. So there's 7 places around the world where he identified that people live the longest. They live to be 100. And he studied these locations and wondered, is there some magic elixir that they're all having, that they, is there some ingredient that they all have? Or why do these people live to 100? And he discovered that there was always, in these communities, there was a sense of community. There was a sense of purpose. People moved their bodies naturally. So they were always going out on walks. They were, shepherds in Greece, walking their, the animals, up and down the hill. So they weren't going to the gym and going on the, elliptical, right? It was just walking was naturally part of their day. They did a lot of gardening, right? They spent time outside. So their bodies were in sync with their circadian rhythm, right? The sunrise, the sunset. They ate mostly like a Mediterranean diet. So, lean meats, lots of fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, didn't have a lot of saturated fat, didn't have a lot of processed foods. It's very interesting. So I encourage anybody who's interested to look up the blue zones. So just having the good lifestyle, which is, really links into the integrative nutrition, which I love. Taking those lessons from these places where they're naturally moving their bodies, they're naturally eating fresh fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and lean proteins, a little bit of dairy, and they're living to be 100, more than any other place in the world. So there's a place in Japan, Sardinia, I believe, in Greece. There's a Loma Linda, California. I'm not recalling what the other ones are, but it's just fascinating to take some lessons from these other cultures and what are they doing.
It'd be even more interesting to see what their fertility rate is like as well. Because I've heard a lot of fertility specialists go on about the Mediterranean diet and say, that is the optimal diet just for overall health and also fertility. And I was kind of like apprehensive about that kind of diet because obviously we do have a lot of pollution in the seas, and a lot of fish are seen to be heavy in mercury now, and we're told not to have it as pregnant women. But then fish are really good for you. They've got omega-3s and all these different things. So yeah, I do find that very interesting.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's the fish that swim lower down and eat other fish. Like the bigger the fish, the more mercury content they're going to have. So the smaller fish, like the sardines and the, anchovies, I think they have less mercury than some of the other. Yeah. So it also depends, and if you're living in Italy, those are probably the fish that you have. You put anchovies on a salad.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I actually have been to like Italy and places in Europe, and it was a lot of anchovies in most meals, and I was like, oh, I was like 13 at the time, and I was just like, that's gross, I don't want little fish things. But they're really good for you, and they do have a very low I think it's in the very low category for mercury. Anyone who's been pregnant would probably have looked it up now, because you can kind of get all these charts and what not to eat, what to eat, and what has mercury in it.
Well, and I think also, people call it the Mediterranean diet, but it's really more a Mediterranean way of life is how you should think. It's because with my clients, I never say go on a diet. It's more of, these are the foods that are good for you. Let's, fill your plate with all these wonderful foods that nourish you, whole foods, whole, ingredient foods that you can pronounce. And you sort of limit these other, packaged foods and, things with barcodes and stuff like that. And it's more of a way of eating as opposed to being on a quote diet, because I think of diet the I don't know, the grapefruit diet or, the bone broth diet or something.
Shakes only.
Shakes only, or buy this packaged meal and you'll lose weight. And it's not just about losing weight, it's doing it healthfully and doing it that's right for your body. So eating rainbow and eating real food, if your grandmother can't pronounce it and wasn't around when she was there, then maybe you should think twice.
No, I love your ethos and that whole thought of, it's a style, it's a lifestyle. And I think a lot of people do get trapped in that diet. They're like, oh, it's just temporary, because diets are temporary.
Yeah. Right. But it shouldn't be. We should be looking at our health as a long-term thing. These are lifestyle changes that we're doing. And I teach a method that people start making new habits, and you take baby steps, just add one more vegetable this week, go to the grocery store, go to the farmer's market, find that one thing you haven't had, aubergine in years, so go and buy one and look up a recipe, and and then the next week, squash, I haven't had squash in forever, so you just start adding things as opposed to the opposite, which is restriction and taking things away, because often people think oh, I'm going on a diet, I can't eat this and I can't eat that, and that's not healthy, right? We want to think of, what can we eat? Oh, I can have this whole fruit medley. Oh, I can have mangoes, I haven't had mangoes in years, papaya and pineapple and squash and red onion and shallots and, garlic. And, you just start adding things to your repertoire as opposed to thinking of what you're taking out.
Yeah.
It's a much more positive way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and when you start taking stuff out, you'll end up putting them back in because you're like, oh, I don't want to miss out on all this stuff anymore, and then you get those cravings, and then it's
Yeah.
really hard if you're in the food aisle and it's there to say no
Right.
because it's right there,
Right. Yeah. I mean, I do like to say that there really
gosh.
shouldn't be, I mean, this is for fertility, this is for, for life in general, but there really shouldn't be foods that are off limits. You can have the donut or the brownie or the crisps or cookies or whatever you want, but you really need to think about, how is this nourishing my body? Right. And you can have, one, you don't have to have 15. Right. And if you're filling your body with healthy foods that really nourish it, you actually will be surprised that you're not going to be craving those other foods that have such high sugar content or artificial flavorings and things like that, because your body's getting what it needs. So the sugar, it gives you a dopamine effect, and you become addicted to that effect of the sugar. And apparently sugar is 7 times as addictive as cocaine.
Yeah.
So it has a huge control over us. So it's no wonder that we keep going back for these sugary treats, right?
I've heard that
So,
it switches on the same things as cocaine. We've actually discovered that sugar isn't actually good for us, obviously, and we've come up with diabetes and all these different things it causes, yet it's still added to everything that's packaged or that isn't fresh.
Well, back in the in the 70s and 80s, like between the time of those 2 beach pictures, right, there was this whole like low fat, no fat craze that was going on. And so if you take fat out of food, well, it doesn't really taste very good. So what did they put in? Sugar. And become addicted to sugar. And the sugar consumption has just skyrocketed in the last 115 years or so. At least from American point of view, it used to be something like people would consume about 15 grams of sugar per day, and now it's like 157 grams of sugar per day. It's crazy. The increase, and the sugar causes inflammation in the body, and that if you're trying to get pregnant, if you're just trying to stay healthy, you want to reduce the inflammation in your body. So having all that sugar, your body just goes like, oh, okay, well, wait, I'm trying to process this. So, let's throw some insulin on that. Okay, I'm processing it, but there's too much. There's too much sugar in here. So then you have this cortisol, spike because your body is under stress. And so now your cortisol levels are higher. And then, that throws off your melatonin. So now you're maybe not sleeping well. So it's like you have all these hormonal changes because of the foods that you're eating that are not good for you, that are causing inflammation.
Yeah.
So, people have hormones only as, the sex hormones, testosterone and, estrogen, but there's a lot of other hormones out there. And also the fake sugars, like something like fructose, actually interferes with leptin. And leptin is a hormone that tells your brain that you're full. And so if you're having things with fructose, which is in a lot of cereal bars, packaged items, I mean, that's really sweet, that there's this leptin resistance. So your brain isn't getting that signal that you're full. So you eat more. And now you're in this overeating cycle, right? Because of the fructose that's in there. So there's hormonal changes that are not just the sex hormones that we think about, and it's based on the foods that we're eating. So it's really crucial to look at what you're eating and how you can clean up your diet.
And if it's making those differences in your body with some hormones, I mean, everything is a knock-on effect, especially in your body. Your body is supposed to work symbiotically. It's all together. So if you are in that kind of sort of scramble, your body's trying to deal with things, then, I mean, that probably would affect fertility. It probably would affect your ability to carry and be healthy, because obviously you're just bombarding your system with all this stuff that causes inflammation. Inflammation is disease. Like inflammation causes and is disease. So you got to do something about it. And back to what you were saying earlier about going through menopause, like all the ladies who I've talked to who are going through it early have really kind of explained the same symptoms as any woman going through menopause. It's just that it's prolonged, and it's like every single day for like a long time. So for some women, like I spoke to a woman yesterday, and she literally has been going through it since the age of I think 16, and she's still going through it now, and she's in her, I think she said 40s. So that,
oh my goodness,
and it's the menopause symptoms the whole time. She
the
said
whole time.
it was hot. She goes outside, she's got sandals on, but she's not cold. It's freezing outside, but she's hot. So, you know, so yeah, so it's the same sort of symptoms as well. So, I mean, I'm sure your services would definitely help these women who are going through these menopausal changes, because it's all similar in terms of like the chemicals, the hormones, and all those things. But yeah, so yeah, if you wanna contact Suzy, I'll put
Yes.
alone. You can contact her.
Yeah.
Just before we wrap up, I have two more things I wanted to kind of cover with you. One, it might be a bit triggering. So how do you feel about the food pyramid?
Oh, yeah, I think it needs to be updated. I think I don't even know what the recommended, number of like fruits and vegetables. It's something like 4 or 5.
Yeah.
I would probably do that times 3. So maybe we should really be having about 12 to 15 portions of fruits and vegetables daily. And you know what, also, people have to look at what foods cause inflammation in their own bodies, and everybody's different, right? So, if somebody has a gluten issue, or somebody has trouble with dairy, but they need to identify that. And I work with an outside company that does testing to see if those sensitivities are there. It might not be an allergy. There could be intolerances. It could be sensitivities. There's different levels. So people really have to do what's right for them. So again, it's not really my job to tell people like, this is what you should be doing, and send a prescription form out there. People have to figure out what works for them. And I help guide them and keep them on their goals, keep them accountable to their goals in my role. But yeah, I think the food pyramid is quite outdated. Yes.
Yeah, it's always upset me. Like I see that bread, all those bread products and stuff right at the bottom, including cereals, packaged cereals, and it's like they're full of sugar. And all of that is right at the bottom, like the biggest part. That should be the most of your diet. And you're like, that makes absolutely no sense for health at all.
Right. Exactly. It just sends us, with these spikes and these crashes.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I had cereal. I don't even know. Years.
I did like a few months ago, and then I found out I actually can't process folic acid. I actually have the 2 genes, one from mum, one from dad, that mean I can't process folic acid. So I've had to like cut out a lot of things, including most bread products, pretty much anything packaged, because anything that has wheat in it will have folic acid most of the time, because in this country it has to be added. And I think in America it has to be added to some things.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah, we have all sorts of enriched flours and things like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, enriched. Stop it.
Right. Well, they stripped everything out. They stripped out the endosperm of the wheat. They've stripped out the bran. They've basically just made it into a powder. And then they put it all back in, minus all the fiber that's actually good for your gut. So it's not right. Right. But there are things like sprouted grains. There are certain, bread products that are better. Sourdough bread, some people tolerate that really well. And that's
I do actually tolerate that really well. I love sourdough bread.
It's already like the fermentation process has already started, so some people tolerate that a little bit better. But
I've heard anything fermented is just really good for the gut and can help people who are having trouble with food. Yeah, and I've heard the opposite, but I think those tend to be the people that have irritable bowel already, have those issues already, where they have to repair the gut first and then sort of go into, eating those more rich kind of dense foods. Health is just such a mixed bag, and because we're so different, each one of us, it just makes it really complicated, especially when we have like genetic things, like with mine with the folic acid and yours with the clotting. Like I'm sure there's dietary things that can probably help as well.
Well, like vitamin K is supposed to increase clotting, but so people who are on certain medications like warfarin, which is a very powerful blood clotting medication, anti-clotting medication, and that's actually you can't take that during pregnancy, but apparently they're supposed to limit vitamin K, which is in green leafy vegetables and like avocados and things like that. So
don't eat greens. Yay!
It's sort of what you think, healthy, leafy greens are good for us. So, but the other thing that I want to just mention is that, food alone isn't going to make us healthy. We have to look at the lifestyle factors. What are the things that are causing us stress? And then start addressing those, because you can't just look at food. Food alone is not the solution. So we want to live healthy lives, right? And nourish our bodies from the inside with our food, but also from the outside with all the lifestyle factors being in balance.
So true. And lots of people say, you know, let food be your medicine. But yeah, what you're saying is just so true. Like, you've got to think of it from a holistic approach,
Yes.
rather than just one thing, because it's never just
Right.
one thing. It's everything.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Your sleep and just the way, your stress levels really, and what are the things that are causing the stress? Is it a relationship? Is it a bad career? Is it your social life? Is it your home environment? There could be many things, right? And then that throws our sleep off, and then our physical activity is usually thrown off. So, right. So it's putting it all together holistically, as you said.
Yeah. And just the last thing before we wrap up. You said that your loss was 20 years ago. And I was just wondering, for all those ladies who are, really going through it right now, and they're in that season, is there any sort of words of comfort, or sort of any wisdom that you can offer? Because it's 20 years on. I've heard like time heals all wounds, and so it might be nice to hear it from someone who knows and has gone through it.
Right. I mean, I'm lucky that I have my kids now. Going through it was really tough. And I think if I personally had more people to talk to about it, I probably would have been able to go through it a little bit easier, either with a therapist or with a community. And, I don't know if there those communities out there. There might be, but even online, maybe you can find, I would suggest people find a group of other people who've suffered loss, and just talking about it, knowing that you're not alone, because definitely you're not alone. The numbers are staggering how many women go through loss. So finding that community is really, for me, that was really would have helped more. I didn't really find that community until much, much later. And then, yes, I suppose time did definitely heal. And yeah, I mean, I went for years just sort of not really thinking about it. And then once in a while, I remember that. But I think finding a community to help and support, and I think what you're doing is just wonderful and crucial in that aspect as well. So you should be commended for that, for, starting this community, starting the discussion.
Thank
So
you.
hopefully that will help people. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope I can sort of help you feel better as well, and just let you know that there are lots of groups now. There's a whole community. We've actually got a speaker who's got groups, like actual online groups, where they meet and they talk and they like go through everything. And there really are amazing groups now, and physical ones and online ones. So yeah, there's so much more support now than there ever was. I'm so sorry you had to go through that on your own. I wish that, all those women that went through it around the same time as you and before, I wish that they had someone. And that's just so harsh that you just didn't have that support.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we can give women that now. That's just, it's really lovely.
Yes. And have the conversation and normalize it.
Yeah. And just a quick one. You have a husband? Do you have a husband? Yeah.
I'm currently divorced at the moment,
sorry.
but yes. No, that's part of my my work, is that I actually work with divorced women on getting their lives back in control. Because again, divorce it's a stressful thing. So it's actually been a blessing, because through my divorce, I've been able to launch this whole other area of my career, and helping women, through trauma, whether it's pregnancy loss, obviously, that's, some women are going through in more in your community, or divorce. Some of my clients are even retired, and they're in their 70s. So I feel like there's all these major life stages that people go through. And again, it's looking at the lifestyle factors, looking at their food, and giving them that holistic approach to living their healthier lives, and feeling in control, that you have that power, that you can heal, that you can move on, you can live your best life, whether you've suffered a loss, you're, in your retirement years, whether you're divorced. So it's all, I've used all these things to kind of put, myself together and get control of my life and feel empowered. And that's what I hope other people do.
Well, I'm so glad you can take these things and just make some some good things come, you know.
Yeah.
Because I've had so many women going through divorces, and it really, really knocks them, you know.
Yes.
And to be able to help women through that time, that must be really fulfilling, because how it feels, and it's a real struggle.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure there are probably women in your community who, they struggle through infertility, and that puts a huge strain on the marriage. Or relationship. They might not be married, but puts a huge strain on the relationship. And so 50% of marriages end in divorce. So it's it's a conversation that, we need to be having. It's very common. Right.
Yeah, and I think with infertility as well, like, you do just get this kind of like push apart, because it's just so consuming, and you can end up with this big wedge, and it's just it's very sad.
And of course, there's the infertility on the man's side too. We haven't even discussed that, right? It's not always the woman's body that isn't working properly, or things aren't aligning, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for talking with me and giving us all this knowledge and input. Again, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that alone. And hey, women, everyone watching, we have so many communities out there now. You have such a big community around you. Don't let that go to waste. Don't let go of it, because going it alone is it's not worth it. You can have people around you, and it might be painful to talk about it, but it will help you in the long run, and you can just have that wholehearted feeling rather than the emptiness. Have each other.
Yes, exactly. Women supporting women. I love it. Yes.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to link all that stuff below.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure talking with you. All right. Take care. Thank you so much.
Please note that all speakers, including experts and professionals, express information, views, and opinions that should not be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any medical conditions. If you have a medical issue, please consult a qualified professional. Speakers voice their own views, opinions, and conclusions, and they may not reflect the views, opinions, and conclusions of other speakers. Ella Rose, The Joy of Sunflowers, and its sponsors may not endorse all or any of the views, opinions, or conclusions expressed.